Hey there! Today we're going to be making these beautiful paper hydrangea flowers. The supplies you're going to need for this project are 50 to 65 pound cardstock. You'll need scissors or a cutting machine, glue gun, 18 gauge wire, tissue paper in a similar color to the cardstock you're using. You'll need a 5-inch half foam ball, corsage tape, and then you can also use my paper bloom shaping mat and tool set, which is optional, and of course you'll need the templates, which are linked below this video. I use 100 hydrangea petals for this tutorial. You can use more or less according to your preference, and I'll explain more about that in a minute. And you can also find cutting machine measurements below in the description as well if you should need them.
Okay, so for this tutorial we have a half foam ball here, and you can execute this with really any foam ball. So if you want to do one that's a little smaller, you want to do a really big one, you can apply the same technique, just choose the size of the half foam ball you want, and then you'll of course have to cut more or less of the hydrangea templates. So everybody's petal cutting is going to be different then because of that. Once I build this, I will go around and count for you exactly how many I have, but there is not going to be an exact amount. So everybody's petal count will be different. As a whole though, for like this example, just to give you a ballpark, I had 100 of these cut. So there's 50 total of the layers that I'm going to show you how to put together here in a second, but 100 because we layer 2 per. So that's just a ballpark for this size here. I'm using a 5-inch foam ball for this. And you're also going to need some tissue paper here as well, because we're actually going to cover this first because we don't want to see any white showing through. So I'm just going to set this aside real quick, and we're going to cover the ball first, and then we'll go back to actually assembling the petals on top. So to cover this ball, I just place a piece of tissue paper in a similar color. It doesn't have to be the exact same color, but a similar color, over the foam ball, and I flip it over, make sure it's kind of centered there. And then I usually will go around the rim and just add a little glue first that way. And when you cut this, cut it to where it will of course cover the ball and overlap, but don't cut so much that you have like a big ball of tissue paper here or anything like that. You just want enough to give it a covering. I'm running out of glue over here, so let me do that real quick. All right. Okay. So I'm just gonna cover this so. And if you are planning on stemming these, which I will show you how to do, you may not be stemming them if you're adding them to a wreath, but if you're planning on stemming them, definitely make sure some of your foam ball is showing here, because that's where we're going to place the stem. For this excess here, you can trim it down a little bit if you want to, which is what I'm going to do. Just going to trim it down just a tad. Don't have to do a lot, but just a little bit, and then finish gluing it to where it's kind of all covered there and nothing's sticking up. So essentially that is fine. Looks messy on the bottom, that's okay. We're not going to see it when we're done. Get all my little glue strings off here. So now that we have it to where the top is covered and you won't see the white through, we can start adding our pieces here. And the way I create these pieces is, this is my paper bloom shaping mat and tool set. This is optional, but can be helpful if you have it. Many of you may already have it, because I know y'all have bought a lot of them from me. Greatly appreciate the support. So I just take the center and I just press into the mat and roll the centers, so that it just helps the paper bend upwards and gives it some dimension. If you wanted to experiment with different ways to do this, you could. You could always, curl them inwards with a dowel or something like that. I like this look personally. If you don't have this mat set, then, let me take another one here. If you don't have this mat set, then just kind of fold these upright. Takes just a tiny bit more time, but you can still accomplish a similar effect. So that's what you can do if you don't have this or don't wish to purchase. If you are interested in this, I will link it below this video as well. And then as you notice here, I'm using 2 different tones of blue, which is up to preference, but I like to put the lighter tone on the bottom and the more true blue tone on the top here. So I just add a little dot of glue and overlap that. And then just set it aside, and then you'll of course repeat as many times as necessary. So let me just do these few right here. And if you're curious to know exactly which kind of paper I am using here, I am using a 50-pound text weight metallic cardstock paper from cardsandpockets.com. You can also find paper at Michael's Craft Store, Hobby Lobby, on Amazon. I usually recommend anything between 50 and 65-pound paper for the most part. I generally do not go above 80-pound at most, because then the paper gets really difficult to work with and does not look as pretty in the end when you're done creating your flowers. So I have a good amount of petals here to work with, so I'm going to set this aside. And I'm going to pull this back over, and we're just going to start gluing. It's really simple to do. It looks like $1,000,000 when you're done, and while it does take some patience, the concept of it is very simple and not at all hard to do. Now, depending on how intricate you wanted these to get, you could glue them really tightly together, or you could just glue them enough to where they're just touching. I generally do where they're just touching. Sorry about that. That was an alarm of mine going off. I generally do it where they're just touching, because I don't want to have to create an additional 15 or so for an entire ball. It still looks really pretty, and this, like I said, it's not hard to make, but it is a little tedious with the time it takes to assemble these. And of course, I did use a cutting machine for this. If you're cutting by hand, I do include printable PDFs, and God bless you, because I don't think I would ever have the patience for that. But if you do, good for you, and go for it. I just do highly recommend a cutting machine, because it makes the job so much easier. Unless you're making like really tiny foam balls with them, then it wouldn't take very long to do, I suppose. So just keep going around here. This is pretty self-explanatory. You're just going to cover the entire ball until you're satisfied with it. And it's kind of a personal decision. And like I said before, everybody's petal count is going to vary some, but for this size that I am using, I have used about 100 pieces total, and once layered, they were about 50 some pieces on here together as layered petals. So I'm just going to continue to add these, and once I get towards the end, I'm going to jump forward here in the video so I don't bore you to death for the next 10 minutes while I glue all of these petals on here. Okay, so I have my ball completely now covered in all of these pretty little hydrangea blooms. So you should have something that sort of resembles that. Try to go all the way down to the edge if you can, and it'll make it look like a nice rounded bunch of hydrangeas there. And now we need to finish off the bottom. So if you are putting this on a wreath or something, just glue it straight on as is, or you can just add a couple of leaves on the underside like this and then glue it on. If you're wanting to stem them, I'm going to show you how to do that. So let's see here. To stem these, the trick with this is most of my flowers, I build them from paper alone. I don't include a foam ball on the bottom. So this is a little bit more awkward, heavy weighted, and a little different and larger than my average size small flower that I would stem. So in order to make this stem work, I use 18 gauge wire here, but I kind of group 3 together, and then I wrap the 4th one around it. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it, we're going to cover the whole thing with corsage tape. Another way to do it is if you don't want to wrap, you could just group all 4 of them together and just start wrapping the corsage tape. I usually just will take one of them and wrap a little bit because it keeps everything in place and nothing slides around. So I have 4 total here, and I'm wrapping one of them around the other 3, just to give it some unity. And this is going to make the entire stem not only thicker than one single stem would be by itself, but it's also going to make it more durable so that it won't, the hydrangea won't flop around on the stem, if that makes sense. Okay, there we go. So the next step is going to be to cover this with corsage tape. If you don't care if it's covered with corsage tape, that's fine. I honestly generally don't care because I end up putting it in a vase and you can't even see the stem. But if you do want to cover it in corsage tape, now is the time when you would do that. So I'm just going to rip a piece off. I'm going to start about 3 inches or so down from the top because we're going to be doing something with that in a minute. So this will just make it look a tad more finished in case your stems might be showing through a vase. I am literally wrapping my sweater in the stem. Okay, there we go. All right, so I'm gonna just wrap this. And this is a pretty long stem, so you probably will end up wanting to bend it or trim it with some pliers or wire cutters, excuse me. There we go. And now back up to the top here where we left it uncovered from the corsage tape. You just want to bend it at a 90-degree angle like this and then form a circle. Just form a circle like so. And this is where we're going to basically put glue to attach it to the bottom of the flower, and then we're going to finish it off with our leaves. So I just generally flip this over, and then I will add a generous amount of glue to the stem. And sometimes I'll even add a little bit to the actual ball as well. And then I will just press it in. It's okay if it's super messy. You're not going to see this when it is complete. And you're going to want to make sure you hold this till it is completely dry. You want to make sure it has good solid contact and the glue isn't still really tacky when you let go, because it'll probably, the weight of the stem is pretty heavy, so it would probably just tip off. I've had that happen to me before. So just wait a few seconds until it's dry. Okay, so my stem is pretty close to dry here. It is still kind of like moving around on me a little bit, so I do recommend that you kind of keep the stem steady like this as we do the next part. You're going to want to cover this bottom part with leaves so it looks nice and pretty. I have 2 leaves cut out here, but ideally if you wanted the entire bottom covered, you would want to do 3 or 4 leaves. So that is just up to your preference. I'm just going to do 2 leaves here for example's sake, and then of course if you decide you want to cover the rest, then you can cover however much you want. So let's go ahead and glue these leaves on. To glue the leaf on, I'm just going to grab a leaf, add some glue to the bottom side of it. Let the first one kind of be the one that you really reinforce that stem connection with. So that's what I'm doing right now. And the good part about hydrangeas is when you're holding it from the bottom like this, they're already kind of all, you know, fluffy as it is. So if you kind of crunch them a little bit, it just makes them look more natural. And then you also might want to lift this up just a little bit and just add a little bit more glue near the edge. Curl these tips just a little bit if you wanted to give them a little bit of life. And just hold that till it's nice and dry. And then I'm just going to add this one over here. And I would add a third one here just to make the bottom look more finished. I accidentally only cut 2 when I was prepping for this tutorial. So just do me a favor and pretend you see a third one there. So ideally you'd put a third one right here to finish off the bottom look a little bit better. Sort of curl it down if you wanted to, just a touch there where you want to do. And once that's dry, flip it over, and your hydrangea is now complete. So you can play around with these and make a lot of different cool effects. Like I said, this is a really long stem, so I would either cut it, or you might want to just, if you think you might need it in the future, just kind of fold it in half. And here are two other ones I made. Let me see if I have an example one. Here we go. Pull these out. Ooh. So with this one in particular, you can see I added 3 leaves to the bottom of it. You could add a 4th one there if you wanted to. So you could play around with that. But making these are really fun, especially once you get a few of them made, because you can really put a lot of them together and make them look really, really, really pretty and cool. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and be sure to grab these templates, and I will see you guys next time.